In today's fast-changing world, leadership is no longer just about driving profit, it's about driving purpose. Today's guest is an internationally recognized brand futurist, best-selling author, and sought-after keynote speaker. Simon Mainwaring is the founder and CEO of We First, a strategic consultancy that helps purpose-driven companies accelerate growth and impact. He's worked with some of the world's most iconic brands, guiding them to shift from a me first to a we first mindset that fuels collaboration, trust, and sustainable success. Simon is the author of We First, a New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and Amazon bestseller, and his latest book, Lead with We, is a Wall Street Journal bestseller, an Axiom Gold medalist in leadership, and one of Forbes' top 10 leadership strategy books. He also hosts the Lead with We podcast, writes the Purpose at Work column for Forbes, and has been named one of the top 5 marketing speakers in the world for 5 years running. His firm is a certified B Corporation, recognized as a Real Leaders Top 100 Impact Company, and Simon himself serves on advisory boards for Sustainable Brands, Conscious Capitalism LA, and the Forbes Business Council. Today, we're diving into the powerful ideas behind Lead with We and exploring how leaders can unite teams, inspire purpose, and create lasting impact by putting we at the heart of everything we do. Simon, it's great to have you here.
Thank you, Clint. Great to be here as well.
So I don't know if you've listened to the podcast before, but if you haven't, think of all of our visitors and guests as basically superheroes. And every superhero has an origin story, so what's yours? How'd you get to where you are today?
Thank you for asking. And thanks to everyone for listening in. And my early career was as an advertising guy, a copywriter. You write the ads out there, the campaigns you see on TV and so on. And I did that in Australia, London, and in the US. And I was one of the writers on Nike at its great agency, Wyden & Kennedy up in Portland. And then I was worldwide creative director on Motorola. So I was doing that career. And towards the end of that career, I was feeling a little bit unchallenged. You try all these different things, but you're still looking for that itch that you want to scratch. And at the same time, something personal happened that really did change the course of my life, in the sense that my father had been sick for a long time, and I was in Los Angeles in my home, and there were 5 messages on the answering machine one morning I woke up. And the first message was from my mum, yelling down the phone, trying to wake me up in my bedroom from the kitchen on their answering machine. Simon, wake up, wake up. Another message, Simon, wake up, please wake up. Third message, my sister yelling down the phone, Simon, wake up. Fourth message, Simon, please wake up. Last message, Simon, Dad died. He was calling to say goodbye. Call us when you wake up.
Oh, wow.
And those words, wake up, took on a profundity for me that I don't even think she intended, because I'd been somebody in the advertising business, appropriately selling sheet metal and sneakers and shoes and all these things over the years. But I don't think I'd really found a way to connect to something that was really meaningful to me in terms of my purpose. And so I was professionally feeling unchallenged, and I was personally destabilized. And rather than try and solve for it, I just sort of sat in my sort of sadness about my dad for a while. And I happened to read the speech that Bill Gates gave at the World Economic Forum, where he said, 2008, the big global economic meltdown had happened. And he said, we need the private sector to play a bigger role in social change. It's having this negative effect. We need business to show up differently. So I took that very much to heart. And I spent 3 years writing a book called We First, How Brands and Consumers Use Social Media to Build a Better World, that you kindly mentioned. And that was the launch of my consultancy, We First Branding, that specializes in the strategy, sustainability, culture building, and impact storytelling for brands that are doing good. And it focuses on how do you capture business value from doing good? Why? So that you get rewarded for it, so you can do more of it. And the ambition is really that business more broadly can have a greater positive impact sooner to solve some of the issues that we're facing. So I'd love to tell you that it was strategic, planned, it was all meant to be, but really life came along, slapped me in the side of the head and said, you need to go a different direction.
So that's a pretty powerful story. So sorry about your dad.
No, that was just the way that life unfolded. And in some ways, I have to say, that catalyst in my life, oddly enough, has made me feel closer to him in ways that I never imagined, because it was so instrumental in where I find myself now. So I see it as an odd thing to say, but almost like a gift, that his loss came with this incredible silver lining. And so I feel his presence all the time, which is amazing.
So what led you to write Lead with We?
Well, I wrote We First, whose idea is basically an antidote or a tonic to the me first mentality that was driving business up to that point. And my team and I had committed 10 years of doing this work. And yet I felt like we weren't moving far enough, fast enough. There are so many issues to solve for, whether it's the environment, whether it's the way we treat people, it's, underserved communities in society and so on. And I thought, if we're not moving far enough, fast enough, what can I share about accelerating and scaling impact movements through business? And we'd done this work for 10 years for wonderful brands like Tom's, Timberland, Virgin Unites, Seventh Generation, Crocs, Chobani, Allbirds, and you learn stuff. You learn pattern recognition. You learn what works and what doesn't, because you're doing it for real, meat and potato stuff, day in, day out, for brands that really need success. And so I laid out all the learnings that we'd had in those first 10 years in Lead with We, the business revolution that will save our future, because it's all about activating business more effectively to have an impact. And so I just wanted to give away all the learnings that we'd had on the way.
Maybe we can start by explaining the core concept of Lead with We and how it fundamentally differs from the Me First business approaches.
Yeah, I think, consciously or not, for a long time, and in many ways still today, business is self-serving, whether you look at it through the lens of, shareholder returns, whether it's quarterly, reporting, whether it's earnings calls. The markets really dictate. And it's always like, are you going up and to the right? Which is obviously, to some degree, healthy self-interest. But at the same time, often it comes at the cost of collective well-being, because it seems that a smaller and smaller number of people around the world are benefiting disproportionately, while a large number of people and society and communities around the world are really struggling. And I don't think it has to be that either-or proposition. I think that business can thrive in ways that really support society and really support communities. So the me first mentality is really your success, your well-being at the cost of everybody else. The we first approach and leading with we is really about engaging the greatest number of stakeholders in service of the greatest collective benefit. Now, oddly enough, that sounds very altruistic. It sounds like you're doing good for others, but it's actually the most selfish thing you can do. Because only when the whole is well, whether that's the planet, whether it's society, whether it's your community, whether it's your company, only when the whole is well can the parts, as in you, your employees, stakeholders, can they thrive. So actually taking care of the well-being of the whole is really the most selfish thing you can do. So leading with we is about choosing to lead, not sit on the sidelines, not wait for somebody else, not waiting for government or nonprofits or NGOs or foundations to fix it, choosing to lead with taking a collaborative mindset. So it's not just you on your own, but you've got this human scaffolding which shares the load. Lead with we, which is the greatest number of people to create the greatest collective benefit. Again, so that we can be excited about our future, so that, the communities in which we live can thrive, rather being this zero-sum game where some do well and at the cost of everybody else.
You had a boss once who, when he said it was a win-win, it means he won and you lost. That was the only way it was a win-win game.
And there's little good that comes from pointing fingers, but I think we know in society these days, there seems to be those who are doing very, very well, and there's a growing number of people that are really struggling, whether you're looking at it through the lens of the US, the EU, or different markets around the world. And what I'm so excited about to this day, after 15 years of doing this work, was, but startups, high growth companies, and these big global enterprises, is that I think business is uniquely equipped to deliver to your bottom line and positive impact. And there are so many great examples of companies that are doing that well and that are rewarded for doing so. And I think sometimes we are our own worst enemy, in that, we are all good-natured by heart, and we do care about each other, and we do care about the planet. We are, it's hardwired into our DNA. It's chemically reinforced in our bodies. So I think sometimes that natural disposition gives way to this sort of self-interested mindset, which is often fear-based and scarcity-based. And so we're going to get as much as we can for ourselves and damn the consequences. But that is a very perilous short game. And we need to play a longer game if everyone's going to do well.
You mentioned there was a couple of, there are many companies who do this and do it well and see the benefits. And you have in the book what you call the virtuous spiral model. And I was wondering if maybe it's just lead with we, and that's all that is. But if there's more you can talk about there, but then also, can you give an example of a company that you think really exhibits these strengths?
You know, the virtuous spiral is really this idea that, if you imagine a spiral in your mind's eye, it's like a tornado. It spins upwards. But what people fail to often think about is it also circles back down to its origin. So the idea there is that you actually create benefit, and that starts with you as an individual leader, a CEO. And then that ladders up to the next sort of turn in the spiral, which is inside your company, your employees. And then the next level is, okay, you're engaging consumers. And the next level, you're engaging your partners out there in the marketplace. It might be for profit, it might be non-profit. And the next, you're leading larger cultural conversations out there in the world, whether it's, how you manage your supply chain, how you treat people, the type of products you take to market. When you not only do that individually yourself, but you engage the collective efforts of all of those different stakeholders, it's not just additive, it's exponential. It's a force multiplier for the good that you're doing in the world. And once you've done that, that collective benefit then flows back down to your partners, to consumers, to your employees, and to the company. And so you want to create this virtuous cycle where everyone's engaged. And at the same time, that engagement creates greater collective benefit for everybody. And there are many, many companies that do this well. I'll give an example. There's a chocolate company out of the UK called Tony's Chocolonely, whose core mission is to take child slavery out of the cocoa supply chain, which is a huge problem. And they have really married record growth and success from a business P&L, balance sheet, bottom line point of view, with having a positive impact, creating awareness around the issue. Or you've got a wonderful company here in the US called Traditional Medicinals, which is, the fastest growing herbal tea brand that has a deep, deep commitment to plant wisdom and the supplier communities that make those herbs possible. Things like Throat Coat and Smooth Move and products that a lot of folks know. What these companies do is they have a foundational purpose, and all the way upstream to their suppliers and all the way downstream to retailers and consumers, they engage them around an idea that's larger than themselves, which is being of service to your cocoa supply chain and its responsibility, or being of service to your supplier communities and the roles that, herbal medicine and plant wisdom can play in people's lives. And by being of service to that higher order, commitment, they build their business, they drive engagements from their stakeholders, and everyone feels like they're part of something that's meaningful in their individual lives. And that's a very powerful dynamic inside companies.
I think the company that came to mind when I was reading the book was Patagonia, I believe it's called.
Sure.
They're like the poster child. I think all their money.
That's why I avoided them. I know the folks at Patagonia well and have known them for a long time. And I think, it's funny, if you're in this space, at some point, you're not allowed to mention a quote from Paul Polman, the former CEO of Unilever, who was, a poster child. And then also you can't talk about Patagonia. And, what is instructive about Patagonia was obviously, their commitment is to save our home planet. And they've got these incredibly sustainable products and incredible breadth of commitments to the earth and our land and Patagonia itself. But when they actually transferred ownership over to nonprofits committed to climate action, and they made the planet their only stakeholder, that was a new benchmark in terms of the commitment of companies, albeit private companies, but still, it set a new high water mark.
For sure. There were a couple, as a small business owner myself, so I'm definitely a capitalist at heart. There are a couple quotes in the book that I really thought were interesting as they pertain to the role of capitalism. One was by Ben Cohen of Ben and Jerry's fame, who said, "The end result of capitalism is not unlike a Monopoly game. One guy gets all the bucks and everybody else loses." And I got to admit, I never thought of it that way. And then contrasted that was Klaus Schwab, who's the founder of the World Economic Forum you mentioned earlier. Mm-hmm. He argues that companies should aim to create long-term value rather than short-term profits. And you advocate for a we first capitalism as a kind of an evolution. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, there's a couple of thoughts that come to mind. And I don't find those two quotes at odds, actually. So firstly, I had an interesting experience recently that I'll share with you, which is instructive to this question. Having written these two books, I was really like, what do we need to be doing differently in business that we don't know? And as I did my research, I realized we don't need to learn something new. We need to remember what we forgot. which is our innate connection to each other as human beings and to the planet. We feel it when we look at a sunrise, when we climb a mountain and look out over the view. We just know it as human beings. You have these moments of awe. And also when we hug someone we care about, there's just this connection to each other. So I went with a wonderful woman, Lynn Twist, who wrote a book called The Soul of Money. I went to the sacred headwaters of the Amazon in Ecuador and Peru, and I spent 21 days with indigenous tribes there. And through a translator, one piece of wisdom that was shared with me from one of the tribesmen there was, they consider that anyone who takes more than they need a sign of mental ill health or madness, literal madness. Because if you take more than you need, you're threatening the whole, like I was talking about before. And therefore, you're sabotaging your own well-being, which is madness. It's almost like the proverbial sci-fi movie where you see the person attacking the oxygen system on the spaceship, and you're like, what are you doing? Without oxygen, we're all going to die. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. It's like that. In a similar way, with Ben & Jerry's, they have self-stated that they're a social mission company that happens to make ice cream. And they've got a number of different core commitments that they support through the sale of ice cream. And obviously, they're quite activist by nature. Not every brand needs to be that way, but they are. At the same time, Klaus in the World Economic Forum, what he's talking about with long-term value is he's actually distinguishing between long-term and short-term gain. And, the short-term mentality that is institutionalized through, quarterly earnings reportings and all those sorts of things, that has really precipitated a mindset that compounds this scarcity, fear-based, winner-takes-all dynamic that we see playing out in so many different ways in business. And I think as there's more and more extremely wealthy people and the cost of living is harder for more and more people, I think that's almost getting exacerbated now. It's getting harder and harder. Everyone's like freaking out and we've got to grab what we can because things are getting tougher. What Klaus is talking about is really, the World Economic Forum is where, heads of state and business leaders from around the world come together to solve these big problems. He's really talking about long-term value beyond just monetary value inside a company. He's talking about natural capitalism. He's talking about value to the environment, to society, and yes, to shareholders. So those quotes actually align. Ben & Jerry's is more activist by nature. Klaus in the World Economic Forum, which has its own challenges, is really an institution that has really rallied those leaders in positions of power to be of service to, the planet as a whole.
I think three things came to mind when you were talking. One is I've worked with many Fortune 500 companies in my career, and I've actually seen some really good initiatives go by the wayside because they would impact in a negative way short-term earnings, even though it'd be a long-term win. And it's like the mentality was, well, if I don't get the short-term win, I won't be around to see the long-term benefit, so we're not going to do this initiative, which is just, okay.
Well, there is compelling logic there from a self-interest point of view. I mean, you see it in the political process as well. Your thinking is only the lifespan of your election cycle and the midterms and all these sorts of things. But what we're seeing, perhaps most importantly right now, is a shift in the financial markets. For a long time, the investor class wasn't at the table. They were like, just show me the money, damn the consequences. But as issues like climate and biodiversity and ocean acidification, all of which affects supply chains. Like if you can make the stuff that makes the cotton, that makes the t-shirt, like real meat and potato stuff. As those issues have become more and more pressing, the investor class is now going, well, wait a second. We don't want to invest in a company that's not sustainable in the sense that it's not set up to survive in 10 or 20 or 30 years because it's not respecting its supply chain, its people, the planet that makes its products possible. And it's also, if these companies are not sustainable in the sense that they're not actively contributing towards the solutions we need, because these investors realize that the more and more a company does harm instead of good, the more they expose themselves to risk, not just from the media, not just from consumers, but from their own employees. And we've seen so many examples of employees calling out their own companies now. So the investor class, for good reasons and bad, have woken up to the fact and said, well, actually, if we want to get the greatest shareholder return, we better be smart about who we invest in. These companies need to be sustainable. And that's a positive shift.
The other part you said there that resonated with me was, the talking about the health of the whole. They've actually, you went to the headwaters of the Amazon for 21 days, but I read there's some research that's done that you actually can improve your health if you just take a walk in the forest, right? So just
forest bathing is one of the terms out there now.
Yeah. and that increases your health. And the other one was don't take too much. And now I'm reminded of the toilet paper debacle during the pandemic here. It's
Sure.
like, if everybody just took what they needed, we'd have enough. But because you went and hoarded it all, now there's a shortage.
Absolutely true. Like, some of this stuff can sound lofty, and we're talking about capitalism at the high level. It is so brass tacks. I mean, all of us know that when we're stressed, we're having a bad day, we've had an argument with our husband, wife, significant other, we go for a walk. Or if we want to we take our shoes off, we go for a walk on the beach or on the grass, we feel better. You don't have to call it grounding. You don't have to call it all these fancy things. You're just like, I don't know what it was, but I was feeling pretty bad. And I went for a walk in nature and it felt better. I just felt like I was being nurtured in some way. And in a similar way, I think instinctively we know that if we keep taking everything for ourselves and forget about everybody else, at some point that's going to break, especially when everybody does it.
Yeah.
It just logically doesn't make sense. So all of these sort of lofty economic discussions and, explorations of capitalism and people who write books about it, like you and me, it's common sense. It's just common sense. And I think, I don't mean to speak for everyone, but I'd like to think that we would all be happier and better off if we knew that we weren't just taking care of ourselves, but we were taking care of others at the same time, so that our families, our communities, our future can be positive for everyone,
We were chatting before we started recording, and then I have this note early in the book. You talk about how important trust is and how misinformation or disinformation can negatively impact that. And it kind of warps everybody's perception of reality. And there was a sense that really struck with me. It says, if we can't agree on the world we live in, how can we possibly fix it? And then you go on to say the disinformation, deliberate or unintended, has become and will continue to be a huge obstacle to all authentic connections. And I'm really big on connections. And I know you wrote the book, I think back in 2021 is when it was published. So kind of the early days of the pandemic. Over the last 4 years, AI has also exploded.
Sure.
So I was wondering how has the last 4 years really influenced what your thinking was? Has it reinforced it? Has it made it better, worse? What do you think?
Well, when I first wrote the book, misinformation was on the rise, where we were starting to go, well, what's true and what's not? And that was propagated by the news outlets, social media, and so on and so on. At the same time, we were almost decolonizing ourselves. And what I mean by that is, who you met, Simon, was a function of who you saw on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and Pinterest. These avatars, these replacements for ourselves, where we curate how we appear to other people, was more and more people's experience of me, of you, of your kids, your daughters, your sons, whatever, because we're all using social media. So it was a strange moment in time, because we were almost being disassociated from who we really are, and people's interactions with us were becoming predominantly through social media and digital channels. And then on top of that, you had a lot of misinformation on the rise, where truth sort of started to come into question, and we saw that a lot in politics and so on. As you say, since then, we now have AI. And not only does AI hallucinate in its own right, where, the computational power is such that some of the things it said are amazing, but some of the things it brings back are actually not true, or it's making them up, or you don't know where it came from. So that's adding a whole other layer on top. And then at the same time, it's giving each of us the power to auto-generate so much damn content that it's going to be a fire hose from everyone all the time. Meanwhile, truth is up for grabs. You can make it whatever you want it to be. And we're interacting with avatars of ourselves out there on different channels. So as someone who is so old, I grew up in a world where the telephone was tied to the wall, and we had to wait to call our girlfriend till she got home, because you couldn't, all that good stuff. It's potentially maddening. Like, I've got a 26 and a 22-year-old daughter, and they're really struggling to understand this world that they live in. And I think truth is a cornerstone on which we use as a foundation on which to build knowledge and make choices and live our lives. And when truth is so fungible, it's just this wet clay to be moved around as people want. I think it can get very disorientating, especially when it applies to issues that have a direct impact on our personal lives or our communities or our families. You don't know what is true anymore, because you're getting a fire hose of information that has strong biases in it one way or another. So I think, like many people out there, I'm actually actively managing my mental health by only taking in so much of the news, managing how much I take in of social media, much so than I used to, and really trying to have an objective and questioning mindset when we look at content out there today, because AI is only going to get more and more effective. There is going to be real-time, full production, full resolution video that looks very convincing that people are making up, that, and they've got their own interest behind it, and it's going to be unstoppable and just unimaginable how much of it there is going to be.
I mean, it's already close. There are many videos that I see online where if you don't look closely, if you look closely, you'll notice that the lips don't quite match the words.
Yeah,
but that's
sure.
gonna be refined. And at some point, unless you physically were in the room, you won't be able to trust what you're saying.
Maybe we're not here, Clint. Maybe we're not here. Maybe this is just AI. Maybe, oh no, we're a glitch in the matrix. No, it will come to that point. And then, there's a compounding disinformation spiral here where there was a time where social media was trained by you and I out in the real world doing what we do, and we told them what we're interested in. Now there are so many data points through our mobile phones and through everything that our experience of the world comes through the web, social media, AI, informed by all the data that it knows about us through all these real-time data points. So our experience of the real world is being curated for us before we even get to experience it. And then that's compounded by all of this content. So we're going to get more and more polarized or set in our ways than ever before. And I am concerned where that will lead.
I agree. I think there's two things that are kind of depressing to think about. One is you mentioned, which is we need, in order to build anything, we have to have a foundation of trust, a foundation of what's true, right? What is true? What is wet? What is dry? What are the facts? And if we can't agree on those facts, then we're going to have a hard time building any kind of a community, because my facts are alternative facts to you. And, there needs to be some base of this is non-negotiable. These are the facts. And I think that's obfuscated. And the other thing, I can't remember where I read this. This is not my idea, but I read it recently or saw it recently somewhere. Large language models have been trained to this point based on all the data that's out there in the universe that we humans created. But as more and more of that stuff gets, like we talked about offline,
ingested,
created there, AI can write a book. And as they create more and more of that stuff with the hallucinations, and then they take that back in as fact. I mean, it's really scary.
It is scary, and it's a concern too that some of the research and testing that's been done has shown that human biases show up in, what AI is generating as well, many of which are not what we'd want to see in our world. And they get compounded and reinforced. I don't see it though as scary, and I don't see the situation as depressing. When we look at any one moment in time, we can throw our hands up and say the sky's falling in.
Yeah.
But if we pull back and look at the long-term horizon, this is a meaningful blip in the radar, but it's only a small blip in terms of where things are headed. And my strong instinct for where things are headed is there are challenging times ahead of us, no doubt. But these are necessarily painful times, because we have to get to a point that we realize that the way we're thinking and acting on the basis of that thinking does not serve our individual or collective future. And until that reality plays out, we are not going to shift either individually or collectively on a sufficient scale to get it done. Now, yes, that's bad news that we've got to go through this process, but it's also good news that we're moving through this process. I don't believe that this is the end of humanity. I don't believe that we're going to put our species out of business. And if we do, then it's part of the evolutionary cycle where species come and go. It's happened thousands, if not millions of times before. So thanks for playing. But at the same time, I think the human spirit, our innate ingenuity, and our deep and profound connection to the natural world, there will come a point when we realize that if we work with nature rather than against it, and we're a service to each other as well as ourselves, we can really do extraordinary things very quickly. But we need to get it to a sufficient point of pain before that shift happens.
I think that point's coming.
Yeah, we're running as fast as we can towards that cliff.
We really
Clint
are.
says. Yeah.
So continuing with the trust theme, you referenced in the book the Edelman Trust Barometer, when you were pointing out that there's a crisis of trust in major institutions, including business. And then I think, if I recall, you even said that there was an addendum to that where the trust in business actually increased a little bit at the beginning of the pandemic. So how does embracing this lead with we approach help companies build, or in some cases rebuild, trust with their consumers, their employees, their whole ecosystem?
Yeah, I think the world has changed a lot in the last 3 years since I wrote the book. And what I would say is that what COVID did, which was so powerful, was it reframed the role of business dramatically. If you think about February 2020, up till that point, it was unheard of that a company would send all of its employees home, or the whole country would send their employees home, or companies around the world would send all their employees home. It was unheard of that they would provide mental health and well-being to the whole human being. It was unheard of that they would re-engineer their supply chain to make masks and ventilators. It really shifted the role of companies from being sort of self-serving, stakeholder or shareholder-driven organizations to being first responders to crises on a national or local level. And you can't unsee that. And it has changed the way that employees and consumers look at the role of companies out there. There's an expectation that they've got to show up a certain way. At the same time, right now, business has got to deal with a retreat, shall we say, in ESG and DE&I and a lot of the commitments that companies might otherwise make to their people and the planet. So there's been a sort of flex backwards at the same time. But this lead with we mentality allows a company, and not just those purposeful leaders like the Patagonias or Ben & Jerry's or traditional medicinals that we talked about, not just those ones, but everyone, to say, we exist as a company to add value to consumers' lives and the communities and society in which they live. We are additive and we are positive. We're not just extractive and transactional. And the reason that adds value is because it builds your reputation over your competitors. It differentiates you from competitors. It allows you to attract the talent you want, because more and more people, especially Gen Z, want to work for companies that are doing good because they know that their future's at stake. It allows you to foster a culture that's more resilient in the face of all these challenges. I mean, churn inside your company is very costly. It allows you to innovate the type of products you make and change the way you take them to market so that you resonate with a growing number of conscious consumers, boomers all the way through to Gen Z. And it really just more broadly makes you relevant to a future that is increasingly being defined by crisis. Because I tell you, I know this to be a fact, as someone who's been a marketer for 30 years and for 15 years has been doing this work with purposeful brands, the tolerance for companies that are serving themselves at the expense of consumers and employees and the planet is getting very, very thin because people are worried about their future. So a lead with we mentality can really set you up for relevance and resonance and reach, in the days ahead.
And those employees they're very communicative about it as well. So they use Glassdoor and social media to talk openly about their companies.
Absolutely. I mean, there's been Google and Facebook and so many examples where companies have employees have called their companies to task, and not without good reason, whether it's a non-alignment with their self-stated values and what they're doing. It's very complicated too right now because you've got government contractors that are walking back values that they've had for a long time, because they have to be mindful of, the political environment as well as the cultural landscape. It's a challenging time for business leaders, but all of that is to say that it doesn't matter where you are in the value chain of a company, whether you're a supplier, an employee, a customer, a partner, you want to work with a brand that you feel good about being associated with and who walks their talk. And I think that's what really wins the day.
And in the book, you use storytelling as an important key as well. And I've had a couple of people come on and talk about how to use storytelling in business. Why do you think storytelling is so crucial in transforming the people's perception of the business? And how do you create emotionally resonant stories that connect with all your stakeholders?
Yeah, I mean, the reason is that without a story, you're not going to take people with you. I mean, my personal journey that I touched on was, having been a writer on Nike at Wieden & Kennedy for 4 years, you really, you write these campaigns and they go out into the world and you see this huge shift and you have cultural sway and you're like, damn, look at that. And then when I was, one of the worldwide creative directors on Motorola, we launched the Razr phone, which was a big thing back in the day, and it took off all around the world. And I came away from that going, wow, if you use story effectively, you can really make a difference out there. So I thought, what if you took that storytelling over to business doing good? Because it doesn't matter if you're a nonprofit NGO or foundation, there's so much good you can do. We need business, though, to stop creating more problems and provide more solutions. And I'm like, well, how do we get business to do that? Well, you've got to inspire companies to do good, but then you've got to tell that story well so they can capture value for doing it. So it's not a cost center, it's a profit center as well. And so the last 15 years has been really helping companies not just do good. Many companies are doing good. They wouldn't talk about it. You didn't know about it. They just did it through their foundation or philanthropy. But we help them at a strategy level, whether you're an enterprise or parent company, or at a brand level, whether you're a startup, to frame the story they tell to their employees and consumers so that at point of sale, at retail, with their customers, it can really resonate. And people say, you know what? I like the product, and I also like who you are as a company. And that is something that can really deepen not just only the sales cycle, but also the loyalty of consumers out there. And we've seen, I mean, when I started WeFirst 15 years ago, I couldn't buy a lunch to talk to somebody about this stuff. They were like, oh my God, it's so cute that an idiot like you exists, but it's never going to happen. We're here to make money, get lost. Now, as we've all observed over the last, 5 years, if not 10 years, there's been a very powerful rise of purpose in business for that very reason. It's been driven by the consequences of our neglect and our impact on the environment and communities and so on, but also the rising appetite of younger demographics to actually reward companies for doing good.
I'm big on culture, and you talk about internal culture, which you describe as the water in which our company swims.
Yeah.
What role do you see culture playing in all this?
Well, it's interesting. Speaking of Patagonia, I talked to Rick Ridgway, who used to be the VP of Environmental Initiatives at Patagonia a long time ago. And I said to him that he'd been a mentor and such a wonderful friend and guide. And I said, of all the areas in business, where do you think the biggest opportunity is for companies to get ahead? And he said, how they treat their people. And I think it's absolutely true, because who you are as a company and what you take to market is a function of who logs on or walks in the door every day, because so many companies are hybrid or remote now. And that is a function of the culture you foster. So if you're extractive of people, where you just work the guts out of them, they leave, they get annoyed, they get pissed off, and you just churn and burn and so on, you're going to have a very negative culture. And not surprisingly, you're not going to get the best out of them. If you really give a higher order purpose of what this company is in service to, and show up authentically and deliver on those self-stated claims, and give your employees a role to play that makes them feel better and have a more meaningful experience at work, then they're going to be more effective and you're going to have a better result. So it's, at the end of the day, this is not about doing good. It's not about purpose. It's not about kumbaya. It's about human productivity. It's about the biggest line item on your P&L, which is your people. And it's about minimizing or de-risking your business, minimizing the cost of churn when you lose someone, because it costs so much to replace them. If you've got a choice between beating the hell out of your people and just telling them to suck it up and deal with it, or really celebrating their efforts and elevating their experience, the latter wins hands down.
Yeah, I've been in environments where I've seen both sides of that, and I prefer the one you're describing.
So have I. Yeah, I don't think beating people up works anymore. Just these belligerent cultures. Even in Silicon Valley right now, where AI, as you mentioned, is just exploding. There's been a lot of articles recently how all the fun has gone out of Silicon Valley, because it's such a ruthless game right now, and everything's moving so quickly that what it's asking of people is beyond their capacity in many ways. And even with the, salacious, tantalizing $200 million packages being offered to people and that sort of thing, people are saying this is no way to live. And that's interesting.
It is. You talk about what you call the 4 C's, which I co-opted and call the 4 Co's: co-ownership, co-authorship, co-creation, and collaboration.
Yeah.
Can you explain how these principles really help people deeply engage?
Yeah, well, those 4, I just unpacked that as a way to kind of make sense of what does it mean to lead with we inside a company. you've got to, from the presumption, the starting point inside an organization, whether you're leading a sales team of 5 people, or we've worked with organizations up to 100,000 people, you've got to start with the presumption that you co-own the brand. Like, who you are as a company is a function of everybody's efforts. And then how you show up is co-creative. Like, your culture is not the sole responsibility of the CHRO or the chief people officer or the CEO. It's a shared responsibility of everyone every day. And that spreads the load and makes you much more resilient. So it's co-creative. And then, you've got to be collaborative in the sense that you make each other better. You really challenge everyone to do well and be a force multiplier. So all, these codes are really just dynamics within a company culture that you can position as filters, where you say, oh, okay, we're a manufacturing company and we make fridges. In terms of our supply chain and how we manage everyone making fridges, do we give them the sense that they are all part of this larger mission of the company? And how are we providing co-creative opportunities for innovation and ideation and, troubleshooting? It's just, you can apply those different filters over what you're doing to see if you're really building a culture that has that we aspect to it.
I think the reason that it resonated so much with me is in my day job, we do project management planning.
Sure.
And so one of the things one of our core tenets is that we must plan with the team, because at the end of the day, it's got to be their plan for their project. So that's co-creation, and we build those plans through collaboration. So that's why I think when I read that, I was like, it just reinforced for me.
And also all of these books that have nothing to do with business or everything to do with business, like Team of Teams and all of these business, leadership books, I don't think there's one of them that doesn't position the strength of a team and bring together your respective skills and responsibilities as greater than any one individual at the top. You really have to elevate the whole. Yeah,
you do, because the group is always smarter than the individual, right? Even if you may give them direction, but at the end of the day, they're the ones that have the probably the more intimate knowledge and can get stuff done.
Absolutely.
I think one of the quotes I read early on in the podcast days was, I don't remember who the person is now, but it was talking to a Brazilian jazz musician, and they said, how do you know what to play? And he says, I listen to what's being played, and then I play what's missing. And to me, that's a team. I mean, that's what a team does. Each of us brings a different thing to the party, and we have to play our role.
Yeah, one of the most annoying pieces of advice in business you always hear is, what's the number one lesson you've learned? I've had this column in Forbes that you mentioned, and I've been writing it for 14 years, and I'm almost at 600 articles interviewing CEOs or founders. So over those 600 interviews, you start to see the pattern of what shows up. And I have to say, listening is probably in the top 2 of all the pieces of advice. And to your point, when you talk to your employees or you speak with your team, every single one of them is telling you things that you miss every day, which is ideas that you don't hear because you're more interested in what you're going to say, or areas that interest them that they're not fully allowed to explore yet, or gaps. Like, the power of listening and really listening to what people are telling you as opposed to what you're willing to hear makes all the difference in the world.
It does. I mean,
and as a man who's been married for 33 years, I learned that lesson the hard way.
Congratulations on that.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I think that's true, because I think, I always say you have 2 ears and 1 mouth. You should use them in that ratio, because people, they want to say what they want to say. I interviewed Allison Wood Brooks, who teaches at Harvard. She has a new book that just came out that's called Talk. And she has a term called boomer asking. And boomer asking is what so many people do. It's, I'm going to ask you a question just so that it gets thrown back to me, so I can give you so I can talk about what I want to talk about. I don't really care.
Exactly. Yeah. And, whether it's in relationship counseling or whether it's in talk therapy, there's always that exercise where you've got to reflect back what the other person said to demonstrate that you actually heard what they said. And so that the other person knows that they were heard. I mean, all of this stuff is so basic, and it all comes down to fundamental communication. And even this whole idea of leading with we, I think it is enormously complicated and nuanced in practice, but in principle, it is just so damn obvious. There's no rocket science to it. It really is that we're connected to each other, and we're connected to this planet we live on. And And when you go and you speak to Indigenous people or First Nations around the world, to a fault, whether it's Aborigines in Australia, whether, it's the tribes in the Amazon that I saw, whether it's Indigenous cultures in Hawaii, they have a profound, deep, undeniable knowing of this. And they often look at us in the way that we think and go, this doesn't make any sense, because their lived experience is that we're codependent on each other and the natural environment around us. So let's be of service to that so we can be of service to ourselves.
We've been talking a lot about leadership, and then also the team level. So you stress that anyone can lead with we. Well, it doesn't have to be just the C-suite people. What are some ways that I, as an individual employee or team member, can actually initiate this mindset?
Yeah, the great presumption of leading with we is it's not reserved for leaders. It's that everyone is important, and that everyone not only has a voice in the context of that leader, but also needs to have that same leadership mindset themselves. And so it doesn't matter what your functional role is, whether you're in payroll or whether you're in sales, you can always think about how you can show up, not just on your own, but with others, to create the greatest collective benefit. I'll give you an extreme example. I don't know, like payroll. You're in the back room, you're doing payroll, or I don't know, paychecks or whatever it is. And, to others in the company, you may seem that you've got a procedural job or something that's more logistical and procedural and less sort of client facing and so on and so on. But if you really thought about, for example, your compensation structure, and you thought about your bonus incentives, and you thought about profit sharing, and you thought about cost savings, and you thought about, the platforms you use for payroll and so on, you can have a lens on that where you can be of greater service to the whole that will really make your role more meaningful. And by the same token, if you're client facing and you're a sales team and you're selling, I don't know, ceiling fans, how are you going to market in a way that honors everyone inside your company and the positive impact it's trying to have, so that your customer sees that you're aligned in terms of values, and they don't just want to buy your product because it's good and cheap. They want to work with you because you share the same values, and that deepens the loyalty. And therefore, you're being of service to everyone back in the company more effectively, but you're also being a more authentic partner with that customer out there, ceiling fans, cars, whatever it might be. So it really is this mindset where it's not just you for your self-interest, but it's you and everybody else for the largest collective benefit. And you can imagine when everyone is thinking that way inside a company, boy, does it get powerful, because everyone's reinforcing each other.
So what are some of the common pitfalls that we might fall into when we lead with we, but then we fail? What are some of the consequences?
We see quite a few of them in our work at We First. A couple of things. Firstly, if you're a startup or a nonprofit or foundation, often you don't have the resources to build your brand and get your story out there. But if you're doing a lot of good, and if you have a strong purpose and you want to be a company that makes a difference in the world, you do need to let others know about it so that you can capture the value of that, whether it's donor dollars or whether it's sales that keep your business alive. So not prioritizing the storytelling, the branding, is a gap or a miss that will really hurt you, because you're already putting the effort in to be that type of organization, but you're not taking it to market in a way that's really responsible to the well-being of that organization. Secondly, a lot of purposeful companies that lead with we, they have the best of intentions, and they do good, and they re-engineer their supply chain, and they treat their people well, and they take responsible products to market, but they then talk about it in a self-directed way. So they'll go, hey, we at Company X have done this, and this is our product, and this isn't this great, and our employees volunteered these hours, and da-da-da. No one wants to hear you talk about yourself. Instead, you need to be the celebrant, not celebrity, of your stakeholder community, which means celebrate your suppliers, celebrate what your employees are doing, use your digital and social content to engage consumers and give them opportunities to create impact with you. When you do that, they pay attention to the content because it's about them.
Right.
And it's not about you. And then another one I'd mention is a lot of companies understandably, or even nonprofits or foundations that we work with, they do a lot of good, and they carve out precious resources and budget. They make an initiative, maybe after school programs at schools, or lunches through Feeding America, whatever it might be. And then once they've done the program, they're so exhausted, they just fall down, have a glass of wine and say, oh my God, thank God we did it, because it's hard and there's usually not enough resources and time. But what they fail to do is to close the last mile of the storytelling journey. And what I mean by that, they do all of this good, they engage their employees, they bring partners on board, they engage consumers, they have an impact, and then they don't tell all those people that were involved what they achieved together. So they don't reflect it back and tell their employees. They don't reach out to consumers and say, look what we've done. They don't elevate and celebrate their partners. And the danger of that is you've done all this good stuff, and you've engaged all these people, and then it's finished and all those people vanish. And they don't hear anything about it, and good luck trying to get them to get engaged again.
Yeah.
And now you have to spin it all up again. And it's just as hard the second time. Instead of saying, we did it, you guys were awesome, look what we did together, now we're doing this, let's go. And you keep building and building and building. So, whether you fail to prioritize storytelling and branding, whether you talk about it in a self-directed way, or whether you fail to tell that last mile of the storytelling journey so you keep people engaged and take them with you, just some of the things we see.
Are there any daily habits that we can adopt to reinforce this we thinking?
I think so, and these are not ours, although we develop these toolkits and culture building things for lots of organizations. There are a lot of companies that begin every meeting by restating what their purpose or commitment is, so that it's a filter on whatever's going to be discussed, whether it's opening a new facility, whether it's hiring new people, whether it's launching a new product. Let's remember what business we're in. So that unifying, singular, inclusive, collective purpose is a great way to start. Secondly, check in with everybody if you're in a leadership capacity. So we use something at WeFirst that I took from my daughter's kindergarten 1,000 years ago, which was strengths and stretches. So we have daily meetings, but then we also have our weekly kind of check-in where we have a solid hour where the team talks. And we start by talking about what's the strength, which is where you're doing well and feeling great, and what's the stretch? Like my dog's not well and I'm distracted, or a family member's got a challenge or whatever, and everyone's very, very used to and comfortable being very human and open and vulnerable about that. So that dynamic, that ritual really reinforces that everyone's allowed to be human, that they are seen, and that everyone is part of a very human collective. And then I think a cadence of recognition and celebration, however big or small it might be, where you call out people who made extra effort, where they've done a good job, and so on. I think, when you create a culture of recognition, everyone aspires to do better and to hopefully get recognized themselves, and that's a flywheel that can keep building. So it's not surprising when you think about, how do I lead with we? You've really got to be of service to everybody so that everybody is of service to everybody else. And what are those dynamics to bring that to life? And when you look at the most successful organizations out there, if you look at the culture efforts of companies like Lego or Airbnb, or more recently, Elf Beauty and so on, they all have these dynamics in place. They all do, because they're investing in the human capital, not just in the leaders, but in everyone in the organization.
This next question you may have already answered when you're talking about the last mile of communication, but how can we maintain momentum so this isn't just another short-term initiative?
It's interesting. Once you start to experience the benefits of doing this work, and I say that as somebody who had the privilege with my team of working inside small startups all the way through to the Unilevers and Bain Capitals and Logitechs and many other brands in the world. When this dynamic starts to get unlocked, it does create this flywheel, and it's very addictive because people feel like they're seen, They find their job fulfilling. There's an opportunity for them to make a contribution. There is recognition for that. And that always gets frustrated by leadership changes and God knows what happens in the market and all those things. There's always things that get in the way of that. But to make sure it's a long-term proposition, it's adopt this mindset, create the rituals, and then worry about this daily cadence. Like chunk it down into these parts. So when we work with an organization, often we're asked to create culture roadmaps. So this is that we just worked with a big enterprise that everybody knows that has many household brands that they know. And they were bringing these brands together for the first time. And they wanted to make sure that they preserved the entrepreneurial spirit of those individual brands that were high growth, but still get the benefits of the global enterprise they'd just become a part of. So how do you create that culture roadmap that balances the enterprise benefits with the entrepreneurial spirit? And this is all about building that lead with we culture. So we have work sessions, we create toolkits, we create the rituals, and we give a roadmap for how to build that. And that's how you institutionalize this we mindset.
And I have to imagine that based on each of them will be different challenges. If you're doing this as a startup, those guys are, you're balancing, they probably have this we mentality, but then they're also working 80-hour weeks and they're just trying to get stuff done. And so I don't have time to think about this. And then you transition, or you compare that to a Fortune 50 company that you might work with. It's really entrenched in their ways. I imagine that there are different challenges for both of those groups. And
they're equally challenged in different ways, as you say. Too many startups, especially now technology-driven ones, are so keen to get an MVP or get a product to market to get some traction to then raise the next round of capital or appeal to the next fund or whatever it might be, that they're out in market for 2 or 3 years before they realize they've got to build a brand. And if you don't build a brand, basically you're just broadcasting your schizophrenia to everyone. We're this, we're that, and now we're this, and now we're that. And all that precious spend is wasted. At the other end of the spectrum, these very large, global enterprises with SLTs and ELTs and, they're accountable to investors and so on. Yes, there's a lot of inertia, but there's also a lot of procedure to the way that they do things. But they're always challenging themselves to be more relevant to the marketplace, more dynamic, agile. So there are ways to think around that as well. And, we've had to learn how to throttle with, senior executives that have very time poor and, startups that are stretched in, 10 different directions. So that's part of the art and the science of it. It's quite fun. And, it leads to such amazing experiences. We just did a wonderful workshop with a leading home care brand up in Vermont last week. And we're out in a barn in Vermont. We had like 120 people in the team there. It was very unusual. It was very dynamic. It was very kind of participatory and so on. These things don't have to be heavy. They don't have to be kind of arduous. They can be really fun and be really these, not the end of something, but these rallying points, these springboards for an organization that launched this sort of purposeful next chapter. It's really good. It's a lot of fun.
I think people won't know this. I didn't know it until recently, but your company is a B Corp. And maybe explain to people what's up, what makes a B Corp, not an S Corp, right?
Yeah, well, there's C Corps and S Corps, which are different sort of legal entities that have certain tax relevant benefits and they're structured different ways. Being a B Corp means you're B Corp certified, which means you've gone through a very rigorous checklist of how you show up in terms of your environmental footprint, how you treat your employees, how purposeful you are as an organization. And, every couple of years, you've got to kind of renew your membership or whether you qualify or not to be a B Corp. And we've had the good fortune to be a B Corp, best for the world in different categories for a while. And it's a function of what score you get. But, you've got to get over 80 points. And then, there are those companies that are up around 130, 150 points, which is an extraordinary. And it's a way of holding yourself accountable. And it's a shorthand. It's not a silver bullet, which says everything you do is all good and therefore it's like taken care of. But it is a way of saying to your partners, vendors, clients, customers, and other companies out there in the world, we hold ourselves accountable to an outside body that is very rigorous in terms of stress testing whether we're walking our talk. And I think that's very powerful. So if you're interested, check out what a B Corp is, check out B Corp certification, because they're an amazing organization.
It is really interesting. You're only the second company I've talked to that has that certification. So that's why I wanted to bring it up, because I don't think everybody knows about it.
No, actually, I know Jay Cohen Gilbert, who was one of the founders, and he was just starting B Corp when I was writing my first book. And he was like, I want to create a new certification, a legal entity for companies where you build contribution and accountability into their legal entity that they become. And I'm like, good luck with that. Never going to happen. And now they're all over the world. There's thousands of these companies. You got companies like, you got major companies out there that have joined and become B Corp certified, like Nespresso and others out there. And it's just a huge testament to what they've achieved.
So what is the single most important takeaway you want listeners today or readers of your book to take away from Lead with We?
Yeah. Thank you for asking. Everyone, whether an entrepreneur or an executive in a company these days, has an incredible opportunity, but also a responsibility to show up in a way that is appropriate to where we live today and what our future currently looks like. And I would ask each of us to take off our hats and just go, our business hats, and go, think as a father, a brother, a mother, a sister, an aunt, an uncle. Put your stakeholder in our future hat on and really recognize that we have lost sight of something that's foundational to who we are as human beings, which is our connection to each other and the planet. And the great news is that by being of service to that, and in my language, that means by leading with we, you can not only course correct our future, which is looking threatened in many, many ways right now that are very real in our lives, but you can also fortify, grow, and accelerate your business in really powerful and positive ways on the strength of everyone in your organization, upstream and downstream. And so whether you're a startup or whether you're a high growth company or whether you're a global enterprise, I'd invite you to look at Lead with We, the book, because it lays out a lot of those examples. I've also written all of these articles in Forbes that really just look up my name, Simon Mainwaring, and you'll see case after case of real companies that you know, and I'm asking them how they get it done. If you want case studies of the type of work we're doing, go and check out wefirstbranding.com, wefirstbranding.com, or you can even reach out to me. I'm Simon at wefirstbranding.com if you have a question, Simon at wefirstbranding.com. And I don't know, let's allow our better angels, as they say, or the good-natured human beings that we are, to put aside some of this divisiveness that's out there and this sort of winner-takes-all mentality, and recognize that business is better positioned now than ever to make a really positive difference to our bottom line and our pockets, as well as to our future.
Wow. I did have some more questions, but I think that's the perfect way to end it. So, okay. Simon, this has really been great. I appreciate your time today. Thanks so much for the conversation.
No, thank you so much, Clint, and thank you everyone for listening.